Let me just start, and we'll just run down the line really quick. What do you think are going to be the 2 or 3 biggest issues this session, either that are going to occupy the legislature or that are going to occupy you, that you're most interested in?
Well, I think that the most important issue is always going to be the budget, but I know that there's a panel after this that's going to talk about the budget, so I'll just throw that out there. But I guess from a Health and Human Services perspective, I think, and the speaker mentioned this, looking at mental health, foster care, which is something that has generated a lot of bipartisan support and looking at reforms. From my perspective, I'm interested in extending the sunset for CPRIT. That's going to be a very important issue. And also we're seeing the number of unvaccinated children steadily increase. And that causes me great concern. So I'll be focusing on vaccination issues.
I see that the #1 issue in the state of Texas is whether or not the Dallas Cowboys will win the Super Bowl.
And what can you do about that?
Nothing legislatively, but we can cheer them on. I concur with Sarah. The #1 issue is always the budget and making certain that we that comes in for a smooth sailing, however you want to define that. I think that the most pronounced issue is going to be how does the House and the Senate get along? I mean, and the reality is that there will be obviously different types of, you concur with that, right? There'll be different priorities from the Speaker and also the Lieutenant Governor and also the Governor. And they will agree on most things, but suffice it to say, the Lieutenant Governor has laid out what his priorities are. And I have not seen what the Speaker thinks of those priorities, but I know that historically, there's always been some sort of tension between both houses, a check and balances between both houses. I concur that the Department of Family and Protective Services, we will look at that. We will be looking at mental health issues again. All of us know that that is a big issue. We'll be looking at a whole host of school choice issues. I think the top 10% is going to be in play again this legislative session, even though I was assured that it wouldn't be. So we'll be dealing with some higher education issues, and always the issue concerning making certain that we review different type of regulations that we have on the books to make certain that we have a balance, if you will, of those regulations protecting the citizenry of the state of Texas, but also making certain that we don't harm the economic engine of the state of Texas.
We're here to talk about the budget and about, whether we're going to have enough money to do the things that the state wants to do, what's going to get cut, what's going to get used. And I'll just kind of go down the row really quickly and say, what do you expect the budget outlook to be? That we don't have a revenue estimate from the controller yet. We do know that we're going to have, probably after a supplemental bill, zero cash. Last session we had $6 or $8 billion. This time we're going to start with zero cash, lower revenue prospects, and all the stuff that we want.
Well, that sounds like a business cycle to me, and and clearly we're in a business cycle that's in a downturn, and you can see that now in Houston. We've had negative sales tax growth for over a year and a half, and so we have not seen the bottom to our sales tax numbers, which means that we're kind of a boat anchor on the entire state at this point. So I guess I would view this session as going back to those that have raised teenage sons or daughters know that sometimes no is just as good as answer as yes, and we're going to be saying no to a lot of requests in this legislative session.
You want to dive into that?
Yeah, I'll come at it from a couple of angles. First, I do think that this is going to be one of those sessions where we're going to go in, and people have heard me say it before, we only go into a legislative session in one of two ways on the budget. There's only two ways you can look at the budget if you're going into a session. One is, we're broke, we can't spend any money. The other is, someday we could be broke, we can't spend any money.
I missed that last one, Kurt.
And this is one of those where everybody's going to be screaming, we're broke. Part of that is of the legislature's own doing. In 2015, we slashed the franchise tax in such a way that it's like we forgot 2011. 2011 was a real downtime. We forgot 2006, when the franchise tax was created to broaden the tax and have more people paying on it, so we could provide property tax relief and things like that. But that's just one example of something we've done that has added to what I consider to be a structural deficit with regard to public education. The other thing is, and I voted against the bill. I was one of only 2 senators to vote against the bill when it first came to the floor. Some protections were put in on the transportation matter, where sales tax is now going to eat up. We're going to have about $5 billion eaten up for transportation, an entitlement for transportation that's going to make a difference in what we're able to do in this budget.
We've semi-dedicated money to transportation.
It's not semi-dedicated. I mean, you can get it back with a 2/3 vote, and both, and that's only half of it, by the way, that you can get back. I frankly look back on that vote. I should have stayed with my first vote. I look back on that with regret, because here we are faced with a situation where we're now going to have a tighter budget because we've created an entitlement for something I care about, but we need new money to deal with that.
Yeah, well, totally on board with what Senator Watson's saying. This was self-inflicted to a large extent. There's no question that all of us want to reduce taxes. That's something that I think everybody comes in thinking if we can do that, that's wonderful. But we've been focused so much on that we've lost sight of the big picture of how we're actually going to pay for the services that will allow our state to continue to grow and have a strong economy. And the tax cuts that were made last time through the reduction in the franchise tax and through the increased property tax homestead exemption, which is a good thing. We know that we needed to find some relief there. But both of those revenue streams equaled close to $4 billion, I think, Drew. And both of those revenue streams are for public education. So we're coming into this session with $4 billion less that was already funneled into public education, and we know we need to increase our funding for public education. And then the constitutional amendment to help fund transportation. We heard the speaker earlier this morning talking about the growth of our state, and we count on an increased tax base to help us pay for the growth of the state. Well, by dedicating the funding to transportation, which was needed, we've again limited what we have available to pay for that growth, because we've dedicated that growth basically to transportation. So
there is no mandate. I want to be clear about that. Number two, I think it is incumbent, regardless of the results of this election, and this would have been the case whether Hillary had won versus Mr. Trump. As responsible legislators, we have to work hard to provide for the needs of the state, both Democrats and Republicans. We tend to pride ourselves in the Senate, at least we say this all the time, that we're not like Washington, that here we have to work with one another. I'm afraid in the short time that I've been there, I guess this is going to be my, fifth session? I've seen it progressively move towards the Washington approach to governing. And that is something that should alarm all of us.
Yes.
Now, the reason, here's how I want to tell you this. I think that this election, the implications, the consequences are that you have a president and an administration, by the looks of his cabinet selections, that is in fact going to be harmful towards public education, that is going to be harmful towards those who are lacking health care, especially the uninsured, that is going to be harmful to the environment. And so I would say to my colleagues in the Texas legislature, if we really mean what we say, that we pride ourselves in working together, we should do that both in the Senate, in the House, and in the Senate with the House. One of my disappointments in the legislative process, Mr. Chairman, you've been there longer than Senator Burton and I, is that there's this game that gets played. I'm going to call it a game, and with all due respect, between the Senate and the House in terms of holding up each other's legislation, in terms of putting up roadblocks and so forth. I mean, that, to me, as a student of government, that is not the way to work, to build compromise, to build consensus, and to work on the tough issues that were described in the prior session. Where do we get enough revenue to meet the growing needs of this state? What kind of tax system do we have that should be revamped, in my view, from top to bottom? Not just the franchise tax, not just this little loophole here and there, you know, or upping or lowering the sales tax or expanding the sales tax. We need to look at the whole revenue generating streams under our tax code to ensure that it's a balanced budget, but that provides fairness, equity, and that people bear a equal burden, a fair burden in paying taxes.
How does the outcome of the presidential election affect politics in Texas? And I think most of you have been here, at least a few of you have been here during the day, and we have a little primary data now. So what do you think? Remember, you were not only here, but also on the road with both campaigns.
Right.
But now that you're back and survived it, what are you seeing?
Well, it's interesting because there's concern really from optimism and concern from both parties for a couple of reasons. And, you know, here in Texas, it will be interesting to see sort of how the legislature, the Republican-controlled legislature, and the governor, how they view Trump in terms of getting their business done. And, you know, for 8 years, you had President Obama, who was the boogeyman, who was, you know, Greg Abbott said he, as Attorney General, he woke up every morning thinking of a different way to sue President Obama. Well, now you have President Trump, who, if you believe him, says that he's committed to border security, he's committed to building the wall, he's committed to dismantling the Affordable Care Act. You know, if he does all of that, then you have a bunch of happy, you know, Republican lawmakers here. Well, what happens if he doesn't? What happens with border security? I mean, will border security be cut here? And so all those questions, I think, remain to be answered, and we'll have to see. On the Democratic side, there's a sense of dread, but there's also a sense of opportunity for them. They see how Hillary Clinton did in the presidential election. In Harris County, for instance, Democrats did well there. In Dallas County, they made gains, picked up 1 House seat. Quite frankly, could have picked up a little more with stronger candidates, a better plan. But I think they see an opportunity to gauge whether the gains made in the last cycle were those gains real, or was it just a one-time Trump phenomenon? But they see the numbers there and something to build on. So this legislative session is sort of the pre-silly season, right? The bridge toward the presidential election and the Texas elections. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.